Hello everyone and welcome back to Ways of the World, a brief global history with sources. As we continue our study of Chapter 7, Commerce and Culture, today we're going to wrap up with an American network, commerce and connection in the Western Hemisphere. All right, American trade networks were not as dense as Afro-Eurasian ones. There are some important limitations. There's a lack of domesticated large mammals, wheeled vehicles, and large ocean-going ships. There are geographical or environmental obstacles as well, including the north-south land orientation. Local and regional commerce flourished, but not long-distance trade, and their cultural traditions did not spread as widely as they did in the Eastern Hemisphere. Okay, the American web. Transcontinental interactions within the American web were more modest than those of the Afro-Eurasian Hemisphere. The most intense areas of exchange and communication occurred within the Mississippi Valley, Mesoamerica, and Andean regions. So based on the map, let's compare the patterns of trade in the Americas with the patterns of trade in Eurasia. What are the what are the reasons for the differences? Okay, American trade patterns were largely oriented along a north-south axis instead of an east-west axis like in the Eastern Hemisphere. And these American trade patterns are largely land-based, especially outside the Caribbean, while Eastern Hemispheric trade relied on the sea roads. And the American exchange was much more local and regional, largely because of the bottleneck that is the Panamanian Isthmus than its Eastern Hemispheric counterparts. All right, a quote-unquote loosely interactive web existed from the Great Lakes to the Andes. So there are cultural elements that spread gradually, and there's evidence of at least indirect contact within this region. Cahokia was at the center of a widespread trading network, and the Amazon and Orinoco River exchange networks were also present. The Caribbean peoples conducted inter-island trade, and the Chincha people traded along the Pacific coast of South America. A major trade network operated in Mesoamerica. Chaco Canyon culture also interacted with Mesoamerica. The Maya and Teotihuacan traded by land, and the Maya traded by sea on both coasts through dugout canoes. And the Aztecs of the 15th century had professional merchants, Pochteka. And the Inca distributed supplies from great state storehouses. They built approximately 20,000 miles of road, and some local exchange at fairs along the borders of the empire are of note in the Incan Empire. Okay, Inca roads. Used for transporting goods by pack animal or sending messages by foot, the Incan road network included some 2,000 inns where travelers might find food and shelter. Messengers operating in relay could cover as many as 150 miles a day. Here, contemporary hikers make use of an old Inca trail road. So let's explain how the roads pictured here strengthened Inca civilization. Well, these state-created roads transported goods and information and held together a rather geographically fragmented, mountainous civilization. The Marvelous Races of the East, circa 1410. So what does this source add to our understanding of how Europeans viewed East Asia in the early 15th century? As evident by this image, Europeans were still unclear about East Asia, and many still saw it and other distant lands as fantastical places filled with monsters and strange races of humans. Marco Polo did little to dispel these myths, taking it for granted, for example, that East Asian people's heads were attached at the same place as human heads. What about the three figures in the landscape in which they are placed might evoke ideas of wilderness or barbarity in the viewer? There are no trappings of civilization, buildings, roads in this image, and the figures are all naked and monstrous in one way or another. All right. Dankoji, a copy of the Candido map, Korea. So let's compare this map with a modern map of Africa and Eurasia. Which regions does the map depict most accurately? Which ones are least accurate? And why might this be the case? Well, this map is most accurate in its depiction of the regions around Korea, namely China and southern Japan, while it is least accurate about those lands farthest from Korea, including India and Persia, Africa, and Europe. Clearly, that's not the case. It's likely a result of decreasing specific knowledge of those more distant lands. So what can a map like this tell us about East Asian knowledge of Eurasia and Africa around 1400? Well, it's important to point out that Koreans knew much of China and Japan and had adopted the Chinese-centric view of the world, but knew little, albeit some, of the world beyond China and Japan. And that concludes our study of an American network, commerce, and connection in the Western Hemisphere, specifically Chapter 7, Commerce and Culture. I will see you guys next time.